Isabel is a passionate student because of that experience now, and she's having even more profound mystical moments. And that was the turning point for her. She had a tumor on her thyroid.
Mm-hmm. I forgot what it's in English. Yeah, here yeah.
So it's a little over 2 centimeters, and of course, the medical protocols get a biopsy and then do the radiation and do the chemo and get it excised and cut out. And when we did the coherence healing, there's a few things that we do to prepare people for that, because we do that healing at the end of a week long when people know how to get beyond themselves, know how to connect to the field, know how to open their hearts. They put it all together. And so there's powerful research to show that, as an example, a researcher studied 10,000 cases of women with uterine cancer. And he studied the electromagnetic fields around their body, and he found out that 100% of the time, every single woman that had uterine cancer had the same exact pattern in the field. Okay, but then he found a certain percentage of those women that had the pattern in the field but had not developed uterine cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But every single one that had the pattern in the field that didn't have uterine cancer ultimately developed uterine cancer. So the researchers said it's not matter that's emitting the field. It's the field that's creating matter. So the matrix or the pattern of every disease is in the field. So if you change the field, you change matter. So we teach people then to heal, because we think we have to make the tumor go away. We actually don't. That's not our job. Our job is to change the pattern in the field. And once you take out, like it's like a slide projector. You have the source called, the light, and then you put a slide in, and then the picture appears on the wall. That's how reality is.
Right.
So all you do is you don't try to change the picture on the wall. You take the slide out and you put another pattern in, another picture in. And when people begin to understand what those patterns are, and they understand how to do that those patterns, that holograms are created by interference patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So then if you change the interference above the frequency of the speed of light, you're in the quantum. And in a matter of seconds, the closer the person is to source energy, the shorter amount of time it takes. The amount of energy that we're recording in people's brains is so outside of normal. It's so outside of natural. It's supernatural. And so that person's having a very transcendental moment, and they're having a subjective experience, but we're capturing it objectively. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, because we see the same pattern. We see it in people over and over again. So, in fact, we can predict it. I can say, oh, Tobias is about ready to go. What do you mean? Well, he's about ready to have a very mystical experience. He's about ready to pop. And so now we can predict it, and we now know how to induce it.
But by the measurement, so you can read it pretty much when it happens, or do you feel it, or both?
No. We're reading it like when we were in Berlin.
Yeah.
Wow! I mean, we had our brain scientists there. We had some very powerful measurements.
I saw it on the wall. Yeah.
Yeah. So wasn't one, it wasn't two, it wasn't three. We had a lot of them.
Yeah.
We were randomly picking people out of 1,200 people.
Yeah.
We were 8 people, 10 people at a time, and we were seeing these incredible patterns. So we now know how to induce that state. We now know when it's going to happen. We could actually predict it in the brain, and people are getting better at having those experiences. So we're changing the way the brain measurements have been read up until this point. And I show my colleagues or scientists all the time.
How do they react? How do they react? Because it also takes a lot of guts to say, okay, you're right, Dr. Joe. I might have to reconsider what I've learned.
No, I never say that. What I say to them is I'll say, hey, Tobias, I want you to take a look at some of my research here. Help me make sense out of what you see here. And the first time they'll say, oh, the person's having a stroke. They're having a seizure. No, that's not a seizure. That's not a stroke. Okay, well, then they're on benzodiazepines. No, they're not on benzodiazepines. Wow. Let's see the energy. Then I show them the energy, and then they push themselves away from the table. They stare at me for a long time, and they say, show me another one. And then they ask, how do you do it? And then the conversation begins. And I'm not interested in forcing this down their throat. I'm interested in just having the conversation. So what's the side effect of that? Because we're evidence-based, because we have the objective measurements to show you can change your brain, you could change the way your heart works, you can change your neurotransmitters, you can change your hormones, you can change your gene expression, you can change your telomeres, you can change your immune system, all in a matter of 4 days. We have evidence of people that come to an event with a certain disease and leave the event with that were blind, that are now seeing, that are deaf, that are now hearing. We have evidence now to prove that it's happening. So what's the side effect of that? Well, I was in Australia and I was doing a one-day workshop in Melbourne, and I was signing books, and I had 3 people tell me their oncologists sent them to my workshop.
Wow.
We have more and more people that are coming because doctors are referring them, because intuitively this makes sense to them, but they're stuck in a model of the chronic disease doesn't change with chemistry, giving someone a pill. Chronic disease changes with a change in lifestyle, right. Changing the way you think, changing your choices, changing your behaviors, changing what you experience, and changing how you feel. And when you do that, you change your personality, and your personality creates your personal reality. So people who truly change, they'll say, my disease is in the other guy. I'm not that guy any longer. The other guy, I'm somebody else. And they don't have to visualize the tumor going away or the cancer going away. All they have to do is become somebody else. And all of a sudden, the body and their biology reorganizes to reflect who they're being. And in order for some of us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And I didn't want to go through a very complex surgery where they were going to put long rods in my spine and stabilize my spine. I would be in pain my entire life and really handicapped.
Right.
So I had to weigh what I knew against what I didn't know. And I said, look, there's an intelligence that's giving me life, that's keeping my heart beating, digesting my food. And if it's an intelligence, it's consciousness. And if consciousness is awareness, then awareness is paying attention. So it's got to be paying attention to me. And paying attention is being present. So I got to get present with it and connect with it. It's not, I got to give it some new instructions. I have to influence it to program it to begin to work for me. So
in which emotion were you at this time? Need, love, hope? What?
No, I was angry. I was frustrated. I was fearful. I was told I was never going to walk again. I had all these survival emotions going on, and that's what I had to overcome. So the first 6-7 weeks of my inner process, I wasn't doing well at all. I was in a dark night of the soul because I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. I'd start creating what I wanted, and then the next thing you know, I'd be thinking about living in a wheelchair. And then all of a sudden, I'd be like, I'm focused on what I don't want to have happen instead of what I do want. Then I have to start all over again. And so
it does it automatically, right? Because you were wired like that for so many.
And when you're in stress and you're in survival, you always pick the worst case scenario in your mind and prepare yourself for the worst, because anything happens that's less than the worst, you have a better chance of surviving. So we plan for the worst, and people live their whole life this way. So it took me a lot of effort to finally work beyond that. And then all of a sudden I started getting less frustrated, less angry, less impatient, less fearful. And I started feeling generally better. I started to feel more love. And then all of a sudden my body started to respond. And once it started to respond, that was it. Then I knew I was onto something. And that's what kind of started me on this whole journey. Think of the pineal gland as a radio receiver. And the pineal gland is a tiny gland that sits between the back of your throat and the back of your head. And the pineal gland's primary function in normal 3-dimensional reality is it manufactures 2 neurotransmitters called serotonin and melatonin. It has some other functions, but let's talk about that.
Right.
Now, the moment you wake up in the morning and your eyes open up and the wavelength of visible light is perceived in your eye, that wavelength of light hits the optic nerve, and the optic nerve sends a signal to a nucleus, which then sends a signal to another part of the brain, and then all of a sudden, the pineal gland gets the signal to make a chemical called serotonin. Serotonin is the daytime neurotransmitter. Right. Our brain will go into what's called beta brainwave patterns, and now we're alert, we're aware, we are aware that we have a body, we're aware that there's an environment, and we're very aware of time. Now, the inhibition of light, or the loss of light, when it gets dark, all of a sudden there's no more wavelength of light. The pineal gland switches off, and it takes serotonin and it begins to make another chemical called melatonin. Melatonin is the nighttime neurotransmitter, and melatonin then begins to change our brain waves into alpha, theta, and ultimately delta, and the body now can go into restorative sleep. So serotonin gets us up, melatonin puts us to sleep, and it's a function of what's called the circadian rhythm. Mm-hmm. How the sun rises and sets, people get used to that rhythm, right?
Yes.
So, however, there's latent systems in the brain when the pineal gland becomes activated. It has tiny little crystals in it that are calcite crystals, calcium carbonate crystals, and they're kind of rhombohedrons. They're six-sided, eight-sided, and they're stacked on top of each other. And I found the research to show that the pineal gland has some very unusual properties. So when the pineal gland becomes activated, those tiny little crystals begin to shimmer, and they begin to become electrically activated. And once they become electrically activated, they become sensitive to frequencies. Not frequencies of light. Light has to go through the eyes, through the senses.
Yeah, the other frequencies. Yeah.
Once it's activated, it begins to pick up frequencies that are not perceived by the senses, and it transduces that frequency, because that frequency is carrying information, into very profound imagery. And now the person is having an inner vision. That's why it's called the third eye. And that inner vision is way more real than anything you've ever experienced in your three-dimensional reality. This is a very, very low frequency, but this is a very fast frequency. And all of a sudden, the pineal gland begins to make metabolites. Now, melatonin is already an antioxidant. But now, the derivatives of melatonin, when this gland is activated, produces very powerful antioxidants that heal: anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-neurodegenerative, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. You take the molecule, you tweak it again, you have a benzodiazepine. What is that? That's Valium. It's your body. Melatonin already relaxes you, but now, hang on. You are going to really chill out. You're going to be, survival centers in your body are going to be shut off, because that's what benzodiazepines do. They shut off your survival centers. So now you feel relaxed. It produces a chemical that puts the body into stasis. The first three centers, you lose sex drive, you lose appetite, you lose the preoccupation with your environment. The body is no longer, the mind, it's no longer driving us. Now you can dream without being interfered with your body. It produces a chemical that's the same chemical found in electric eels. Now the nervous system becomes amplified. Now it's electric. Your brain is going to switch on, and you're going to have a lot of energy in there. And it produces that same chemical called dimethyltryptamine, which is a very powerful hallucinogenic. And now your brain is going to literally perceive another world, and it's going to be more real than this world. And we activate that system because I want people to realize that they're not a linear being living a linear life, that we are dimensional beings living a dimensional life. And you only need one of those experiences, Tobias, and you can't go back to being the same person again, because you realize this probably is the illusion and more real.